Okay, I will switch to English as we will carry out these webinars in English. My name is Ann-Kathrin Schlönvogt. I am part of ACCION Clima, the interface project for Central America and the Caribbean. I am part of the coordination team for this webinar series, and I very warmly welcome you to this first webinar that we're carrying out, treating the engagement of the private sector in climate action. We hope that all of our webinars will be very interesting to you. We will send you a revised timeline because we have now fixed a few of the dates so that you will know what and when the upcoming topics will be offered. We do hope that you let us know about any observation you have regarding these webinars so that we can try to improve the future ones that we'll be offering. And I just hope, and I can speak for all of ACCION Clima, that these webinars will be very interesting for you, your projects, your partners, anybody who is connecting to this call today. So without further ado, I will pass the word to our moderator, Stefan Meyer, who will be guiding us through these sessions. Just to let you know, we will be recording this. I hope it works. We're using a screen recorder because our Teams license still doesn't have the function activated to record. So hopefully we will be able to offer the recording of this webinar in a few days and share it with all of you. Many thanks for your participation, specifically to our speakers who will be presenting a bit of their work and how they have successfully engaged the private sector within their projects and their work. Many thanks to all of you who are connecting to this call today, and I hope you enjoy it. Stefan, I hand everything over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ann-Kathrin. My name is Stefan Meyer. I'm gonna guide you through this webinar on engaging the private sector in climate action. Before we start with the content, I would like to, pay the attention a little bit to some of the technical aspects, and then we have a look at the agenda. So first of all, as Ann-Kathrin mentioned, we are recording this. So if anybody is not agreeing with being recorded, please let us know. The channels for communication that we have are slightly different as we don't have the chat function for all of us enabled in this team call. We are using Slido, which is basically this website where you log in with that code, which serves us in 3 different purposes. One, if you have any technical issues, please put it in the Q&A. Then the Q&A is also there for raising your hands and putting questions for the speakers, especially on the best practices, the 3 cases that we have, and on the presentation on the manual for best practices for the involvement of the private sector. And we're gonna respond to the the most voted, upvoted question, because you cannot only put the question there, you can also upvote questions that are already linked there, so you can like them and then they get a higher rating. So this is for our communication channel that replaces a little bit the chat function. Well, keep your microphone on mute when you're not speaking, and when you're speaking, unmute, and maybe also switch on the camera so that we can see you. We plan to have a meeting for 2 hours, so maybe we have a look at the agenda then. We are right in the beginning at the introduction of this webinar and the webinar series, because this is the first webinar of a longer series. The topic of today is engaging the private sector in climate action. We were thinking a little bit on what would be the best way to get into the topic. So we asked Andrea Mesa, the director of the Climate Change Directorate of the Costa Rican Ministry of Environment and Energy, to give us a little bit an introduction to the importance of engaging the private sector. So this is what we're going to start with in a few minutes. from there, we move on to seeing a little bit what guidance is there from some of the projects in the network. So Pablo Rojas, the advisor of the Euroclima Plus program, is presenting to us the manual on best practices for the involvement of the private sector in the formulation and implementation of the NDC processes in Latin America. We have a short Q&A session following that. Before Olga Sauma, the Executive Director of the Business Alliance for Development, AED, is giving us a first case, which is the private sector commitment to increase the climate ambition. As Olga has to leave the webinar a few minutes after, we're going to have the Q&A session for that best practice also directly after her presentation, whereas the other two best practices have a joint Q&A in the end. At approximately 9:05, we start with the second case, which is N2O mitigation from the nitric and acid sector, presented by Leonardo Medina Santa Cruz, the technical advisor of the project supporting the nitric acid climate action group, followed by the last best practice presented by Maria Alejandra Fernandez, a consultant to the project of transforming tourism value chains in developing countries and small island development states to accelerate more resource-efficient low-carbon development. She is giving us the case of the engagement of the tourism sector in climate change, in the climate change agenda, experience from the tourism value chain project in the Dominican Republic and St. Lucia. This is our last case. There we have followed a little bit longer Q&A session for the last two cases. Before we get into the conclusions and a short evaluation to evaluate the format, but also the content to keep improving this format of the webinar. And we're also going to look into the upcoming webinars to see a little bit what are we going to look into in the next session. So this is the agenda for today. You see, it's quite a lot of content, so I don't want to lose more time in preparing the sequence. Just to remind everyone, every speaker that to finish within their time box so that we can maintain the 2-hour format with as much as content as we can today, and also to keep the format for the upcoming session. So I hand over to Andrea Mesa. Good morning and welcome, and yeah, good to have you back in this format.
Thank you. Good morning, Stefan, and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to BMU, GIZ, the IKI family for the invitation. And I'm going to give some initial remarks of the importance of engaging the private sector in the climate action. What we see from the office where I am, and I am part of the climate change directorate within the Ministry of Energy and Environment. And what we do is basically that we set up and we work to define public policies, and basically we work to define what would be the goals that we need to achieve in order to be a climate neutral economy in 2050. And we have been working a lot in this long-term strategy, the decarbonization plan, but we need also to develop instruments and platforms and a lot of collaboration in order to achieve these goals. And this is where we see the importance of engaging the private sector. We cannot achieve this transformation if we don't work together. And this element of working together, the public and the private sector, is critical to achieve this transformation, which is complex one way or the other, which can be which can threaten a lot of different interests, but at the same, working together, we can find innovative solutions, we can also mobilize resources, and we can then achieve these critical goals. From our side, and the things that we have been doing is elaborating like different strategies. One is to work from this sectorial approach, and we have been doing this under the concept of NAMAs. We have been also working at the individual commitments and developing a program, which is the carbon neutrality program. So each company or organization can contribute to achieve the goals that we have. And then we have been also working with other critical stakeholders like the banks and the finance sector. Can we go to the next slide, please? And this is just a quick remark of the decarbonization plan that we developed. So we have two strategies for this long-term transformation. One is the decarbonization plan, and the other one is the adaptation policy. And basically, in both of them, we have been identifying critical aspects that we need to change in different sectors. And we know that each sector is different, and we know that the challenges are different. So for us, it's very important also to understand the needs of each of these different stakeholders in order to do these transformations. And we see a big area of collaboration, especially in the identification of the right technologies, in the identification of the right instruments in order to adopt these technologies. So basically, for example, can we move to the next slide, please? To the next one, please. When we start working, for example, with the NAMAs, the next one, please. When we start with the NAMA process, we normally identify some specific technologies that normally can achieve different objectives. For example, within the Coffee NAMA project, it was super interesting to identify technologies that reduce the cost and improve efficiency, and at the same time, these technologies contribute to reduce emissions. So these elements of increasing efficiency and at the same time contributing to the climate goals, it's part of the elements that we see in this transformation, and we see as win-win approach when we are able to identify this kind of technologies that allow us to improve efficiency and at the same time allow us to reduce emissions. And we have been doing and working under these sectorial approaches with the coffee NAMA, with the livestock sector, and there is also now a new initiative that we're dealing with waste. The next one, please. But there are also these other recognition, a program that we have, which is the Carbono Neutralidad, the carbon neutrality program. And in this other program, we work more in as individual organization or companies, where what we do is that we have developed an instrument and also a recognition, a program, a recognition. So these organizations can do their carbon footprint, elaborate a plan in order to reduce emissions, and then once they are working towards this process, they can also be clear that they are contributing to the national goals. And I think that at the end, what we have learned is that if we have clear goals, like we have a transparent goal and policy, then it's easier to engage the private sector. Can we move to the next slide, please? And basically, the numbers are there. We have seen and we have been also developing some, I will say, some different recognitions in the different levels of the program. And we have been able also to adopt the program and also include now subnational levels. And at the end, I will say that all these and the lessons learned that we find here is that the private sector is willing and wants to be part of this transformation. So I think that this, if we are able to have clear goals, if we are able to elaborate good strategies and instruments to facilitate their incorporation in this agenda, then you will see that it is possible to engage the private sector as we have been seeing more in a sectorial approach or an individual approach. Can we move to the next one, please? The next one. And the other element that we see, which is very critical, can we move to the next one, please, is the element also of ambition. And here, when we were at the pre-COP, we were able to engage more than 100 companies that committed to the 1.5 goal. And I think that this demonstrates this willingness and this commitment of the private sector to engage. And right now, what we are doing is that we are also in conversations with the climate champions, so we can see if we can incorporate all these companies to the Race to Zero campaign. And it's a way also to demonstrate that in the global south, as they call it, we have also companies committed to this climate ambition goal. So can we move to the next one thing, please? And at the end, the other part of all this is, of course, how can we engage the financial sector, which is also a critical stakeholder that can play different roles and that can catalyze the incorporation of the private sector. And as well, we have been working with AAD, with GIZ, with a lot of the partners that are here today in this webinar. And we were able to adopt a green protocol for the financial institutions. And here they see also opportunities to be incorporating the analysis of climate changes in the risk analysis, but also as an opportunity to develop a specific financial instruments for the adoption of these new technologies and the transformation, but also to generate a good enabling environment to mobilize private sector. The transformation will require the mobilization of public and private funds. And if we are clear on this element and if we, again, define good strategies, then we will be able to catalyze the investments in different strategic projects. And I think that this is critical right now in the moment where we are talking about green recovery. And this is very, very strategic. And I will leave it here. I will say that we really believe that we need to work together with the private sector, that if we have clear goals and good standards and good instruments, the private sector is there and it's there to collaborate and also to engage in this process. And that, of course, it is not an easy task, but I think that every day you are hearing a lot of good news about this engagement. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. And here we pass on to Pablo Rojas from the Euroclima Plus program. Pablo, are you here?
Hi, Stefan. Yes, I am here.
Hi.
Can you please, can you please just verify if you are hearing me well?
Yeah, we hear you perfectly.
Okay, thank you, Stefan, and thank you, Andrea, for this great introduction. So my name is Pablo Rojas. I work for JSET and for the Euroclima Plus program, which is a program that is financed by the European Union and other European governments, specifically Germany, Spain, and France, and implemented by several implementing agencies. JSET is one of them, and also we have other agencies from the United Nations, as ECLAC and CEPAL and UNEP. So I work as a regional advisor for private sector and finance and climate finance, and I am going to present to you one of the works we are doing among the Euroclima Plus program, which is a good practice guide or good practice manual in how to engage the private sector in NDC design and implementation. This is part of an initiative that is called the Community of Practice on Private Sector and on the involvement of or engagement of private sector in climate policies in Latin America. So a little bit of context, we have been working with this good practice guide and with this community of practice since 2018. The community of practice is a joint initiative between Euroclima Plus through JSET, one of the implementing agencies, but also we have as global and regional partners the Let's LAC regional platform, which is a platform of practitioners of climate practitioners with more than 2,000 members at this time, and also with INCAE Business School. For this year, for 2020, we have 8 country teams that are members of this community of practice, and those teams are represented in the map you have in your screens, all the way from Mexico to Argentina. So we have Mexico, we have Honduras, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Peru, Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile. Each one of these country team members are represented by both private sector associations and private sector organizations, but also public public employees that work very close to the private sector in establishing policies and incentives, as Andrea was telling you, in how to engage the private sector. In this community of practice, we implement a lot of different initiatives like knowledge interchange, and one of those initiatives has been to systematize all the good practices that we have found in one document that is going to be released next month on September. And right now I'm giving to you the main framework we have worked in this document. So the good practice guide derives lessons from past and ongoing processes to inform the design of future NDCs, the national determined contributions, but also LTS, the long-term strategies, and as well as other climate policies instruments related to the Paris Agreement in the Latin American region. So our objective doing this work has been to promote the inclusion of private sector perspectives, needs, and innovation capacities to make climate strategies and goals more focused, more feasible, and more ambitious. We have been identifying several initiatives in the Latin American countries, and one thing in common is that almost all the countries agree that private sector is fundamental and the private sector is needed in order to achieve the goals that each one of the countries has been setting in their NDCs and the LTS, but they don't agree on how to engage the private sector. And one of the elements we have noticed is that there are not many initiatives that are systematic and that give the private sector what they want to hear regarding climate policies. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through these 5 key elements we have been structuring and we have been identifying. The first one is regarding policy, regulation, and incentives. Next one, please. So in this regard, I'm going to mention a few elements, and again, the practice is a document that it will be released, it will be public, and once it's public in September, we can be sharing it to all of you. So I'm going here to just have a few bullets, a few points, but then I invite you all to review the whole document, which I'm pretty sure it will be of the interest of most of you. So one of the things that we notice is that a lot of these regulations and a lot of these standards that the public policies should be making can give the private sector the security and the confidence they need in order to make decisions and in order to make investments. Private sector is always willing to invest and to decide on things they know there is clarity from the government. And on this regard, the NDCs and especially the LTS give this framework and this convincement and this confidence to the private sector that the countries are looking for a pathway of low emissions and of resiliency, and they can invest and they can have this decision making. The other thing is that developing long-term policy instruments is obviously really important, and then using the NAMAs to provide the clear framework to the private sector action, as Andrea was telling you. In the case of Costa Rica, we have the different NAMAs, but specifically the coffee NAMA, which have been working pretty good, but also there are a lot of other NAMAs in the region. In Colombia, we identified the industry NAMA, in Chile and in Honduras as well, and another coffee NAMA. So there are different NAMAs that provide this operative framework to the private sector to know how to operatize all the climate policies that generally they are more general. So I will be also giving you a few examples of each of these policies and regulations. In these key elements, we can emphasize on the Mexico and Costa Rican case. Regarding the Mexico, the released climate change law, which obviously involves the participation of the private sector. And one of the main issues of this law is that the private sector participated not only in the implementation of the climate policies, but also in the design of these climate policies, which is pretty good and which we believe is one of the key elements that should be taken into consideration when looking for the participation of the private sector. And also Costa Rica with its national decarbonization plan, which has been presented to the convention as the LTS of the country. Several dialogues with private sector were carried out when designing the policy, and therefore the policy speaks also to the private sector and gives important elements to the private sector to know where is going ahead the country in this manner. Next slide, please. So the second key element I wanted to emphasize is the methodologies to engage the private sector. And on this chapter, we look for what things have worked in those case studies we have identified, and how the different methodologies complement the work that the governments are doing. So the main thing and the main topics here is that private sector should be involved from the designing process and not just the implementation. Most of the countries or most of the old practices in the countries was that they identified their climate policies, they identified which elements they wanted to go to the private sector, and then they go to the private sector, one, to look for some investment for these already identified practices, or two, when they already have regulations or carbon taxes or any type of different regulation and specifications, but the private sector was only considered when an investment was needed or a regulation was going to take place. There was not systematic participation of the private sector in the designing of these policies, and obviously the private sector has a lot to say regarding the designing, because private sector normally has a lot of innovation, a lot of willingness, and a lot of resilience, and these strengths from private sector should be carried on and should be considered when designing the climate policies. Some examples of this is that in Chile and Argentina, and specific cases can be reviewed in the guide. Yeah, we can go to the next one. The third element is regarding the planning and the participation, and here it is very important to understand the roles and interests of the different stakeholders in order to create capacities for the participation both in public and private actors. We have examples here from Uruguay and from Peru. From Uruguay, it is really interesting the roadmap for private sector participation that they have done. Even before going to the private sector for consultation, they designed a roadmap in which they identify the different actors. They identify the commerce chambers, the industry chamber, the different associations, the ones that were working already with sustainability, like Global Compact, like WBCSD, and then the ones that were more eager and that were a little bit more difficult to work with. They identified all the actors, and then they designed different strategies to approach to each actor. But also in Peru, we identified the Dialoguemos platform as an important initiative that they are carrying out. And one of the most important things we notice here is that private sector should be spoken in private sector language, not in climate change language. So, for instance, we in the ministries and we in the international cooperation are very used to speak in a lot of climate change specific words like NAMAS, like NDCs, like LTS, and this doesn't speak to private sector. Private sector speaks of efficiency, private sector speaks of differentiation, they speak of market niches, and they speak of business continuity. If we look carefully, efficiency is decarbonization, business continuity is adaptation, but they are spoken in different languages. So when we approach private sector, we have to know which language we are going to use in order to them to feel interested. The next one, please. And obviously the climate financing is a huge topic. I am sure most of you will agree with me that financing and mobilizing financing is one of the most important things if we want to achieve all the climate goals that different countries and the different sectors have. But here, the important thing is that we don't have to look to private sector only as a financing supplier, but also as an actor in need of financing. And this is important, and some countries have figured this out. For instance, we identified the case of Chile and the case of Honduras. In Chile, we have this cleaner production fund. In Costa Rica, we are as well implementing a new cleaner production fund in order to guide the transformation from the private sector to a more decarbonized and resilient model. And in Honduras, it is pretty important because one of the main strategies of Honduras decarbonization plan is the financial inclusion strategy that looks to how can you manage the different instruments and financial instruments to the private sector. So it's not looking just to the private sector as a financial supplier, but also as an actor needed of financing and how to develop strategies to facilitate this access of companies and of different private organizations to the different climate funds that there are. We identified that there is not lack of financing. There is important money out there, But the thing is that it is not connected, so that we have to do the correct matchmaking between all the suppliers and all the offer we have. Next one. And finally, regarding the monitoring and reporting, or MRV, we have noticed as well that a lot of the private sector climate action initiatives are not really aligned to the national MRV systems and MRV mechanisms. So this can create a lot of frustration because public institutions believe the private sector is not doing enough, and the private sector believe they are doing enough, but they are not being recognized by the other actors. And a lot of this comes because the monitoring and reporting systems are not aligned. So when the private sector do their the different actions and the different initiatives, the MRV of these climate actions are not aligned to the national MRV systems. And this is something most of the countries have to work a lot. We have identified here cases like, as Andrea was telling you, the carbon neutrality program. This is a correct example of how private actions can be also aligned to national MRV systems so that the MRV can capture all the private sector initiatives. We also in Colombia have the Industry NAMA, but those are really selected examples, and most of the initiatives from private sector are not aligned, and therefore it is not recognized by most of the international conventions and most of the MRV systems of the country. Some of the recommendations we make here are that private sector should always use internationally recognized methodology to GHG quantification, just as the GHG protocol and the different ISO standards. We have also noticed that a lot of private sector initiatives are not using these international recognized methodologies, and therefore it is really difficult for policymakers to create an MRV system that also captures all the initiatives from private sector. Next one, please. Okay, and last but not least, I'm sure this is a lot of information. As I'm telling you, this is a guide we have not launched yet. We are going to launch it in September. We are finishing the last details about the specific date and the specific event we are going to be launching this. But if any of you are interested in this, please send a message to the email to the email address you have in your screens. It is CTP sector privado @euroclimaplus.org, and we will send you all the details when we have them about the launch. And the guide will be public, and the guide is regional. It is for Latin American countries, and I am sure that it applies for most of the projects in Central America and the Caribbean. So with this, I am finishing my speech, and I turn the floor to Stefan back. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. I think this is quite interesting for everyone. However, I haven't received any questions yet through Slido. That's why we are putting here the link again. So if you have any questions for any of the speakers, please write down your questions on Slido so that we can monitor and order them for the Q&A part of our agenda. So, as we don't have any questions at the moment, I assume there will be probably some more. So if you have a question for Pablo, we can also answer that later on in the agenda. And I would pass on to Olga Saumer, as she has to leave early our webinar. I think we start some minutes earlier so that we can also ask the questions for Olga after her presentation. Olga, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation, for sharing what we're doing at AED. Can we have the next slide, please? So just to let you know what we do, AED is a business organization. We're made up of over 120 different companies. We are the local chapter also for other business international organizations such as the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the Global Compact Local Network, ARISE, and other GRI and other institutions. We try to guide the business sector towards sustainable business models, and we strive to create a more prosperous, inclusive society in harmony with the environment through business participation and through business engagement in collaboration with local and national government. Next slide, please. So we started working in the context of the pre-COP in Costa Rica last year. We started working for business sector engagement with the DCC in Costa Rica, how to really encourage more business participation and how to identify which areas could be interesting for businesses to raise their climate ambition. So we identified a couple of companies which were already going through processes. All the companies that are part of AED have commitments to climate in different areas, to sustainability, basically in all sustainability areas, economic, environmental, and societal. And we also have a base of companies that are already part of the carbon neutrality strategy for the country, which Andrea also pointed out at the beginning in her intervention. And what we decided was that we needed to take advantage of the pre-COP to raise awareness on the importance and the urgency of climate action and of raising climate ambition in Costa Rica as well. We've had companies involved in eco-efficiency programs. We've had companies involved in the carbon neutrality program. But we decided, and through the international community also, that there needs to be further action, that there is an urgency for companies to really take into consideration science-based targets. And that's what we decided to push for in this initiative. We were basically thinking that we could have 30 or 40 different companies sign a commitment to raise climate ambition in the country. And that's what we strove for. We developed a commitment in conjunction with the DCC. Next slide. And this commitment basically wanted to point out this need to address the urgency of raising climate ambition, of companies to continue reducing their GHG emissions in line and aligned to the Costa Rican NDCs, the National Decarbonization Plan, and the Country Carbon Neutrality Program, which were explained by Andrea at the beginning. So we wanted companies to really get pushed forward in order to get engaged into raising their ambition. And we decided to develop a commitment to adapt climate change, managing risks, and increase business resiliency in line with the National Adaptation Plan as well. This wanted to create the urgency nationally to align with the international urgency into establishing policies and incentives for companies towards a lower carbon economy and resilient business products and services to be developed and to be a part of what drives climate action and climate commitment within the country. So we decided to create this alliance with the DCC and to promote this commitment that is in line with the 1.5 commitment that is going on globally. Next slide, please. So this commitment pretty much summarized. You can't see it here, but you can download it from our website. It's open and you can see what it says. It's in Spanish, but it pretty much asks companies to raise their climate ambition. And as I told you, we were going for some 30 or 40 companies to get involved with this commitment. And we ended up having 123 companies sign the commitment in a public statement, which is very good because it shows that there's a lot of companies willing to go an extra mile and understand the urgency of climate action. We have here the picture of the event we had during the pre-COP with the DCC, with the presence of the president and a lot of the ministers. And next slide. We have all these companies that are already willing and able to go beyond carbon neutrality and eco-efficiency and into raising their climate ambitions. So what we're doing right now, next slide, is we officialized the commitment in this dinner during the pre-COP, as I told you, with the presence of the president and ministers and the climate action champion for last year, Gonzalo from Chile, who was here for the pre-COP and was part of the dinner also. And it was very interesting because he also expressed the 1.5 commitment globally, and this was also part of what we wanted companies to move forward to. First, signing a national commitment that was in line with the 1.5, and then getting them to sign a global commitment as 1.5 once they already have a notion of what science-based targets are and how to get there. So what we wanted is to promote the articulation of the private sector and the public sector in order to move forward the climate agenda. We worked all of last year also, as Andrea told you, with climate financing groups from different banking institutions, and we're now working with the National Chamber of Banks in their roadmap for sustainability of the financial or the banks, and also with the insurance sector as well, with the Principles for Sustainable Insurance, the PSI, also from UNEP Finance. We had an event with them last week also because they want as well to create a roadmap into sustainable insurance and sustainable financial systems. So this was, I think, a very interesting opportunity for us to really set the stage for further working with the business sector and with leading companies within this business sector. We had all kinds of companies, small, medium, large, all sectors, public companies as well, or state-owned companies as well, and some organizations which also were part of the signing and were a part of the commitment, which was very interesting. We thought it was only going to be private sector companies, and we ended up having cooperatives, public or state-owned companies, small, medium, and large. And this is something that we're striving to work through a plan for the next 5 years to really align with the NDCs and with all other, the decarbonization plan and all other country commitments in order to get involvement from the different sectors that are part of our organization and that are part of the commitment, to understand what each sector can advance and what the companies specifically from this sector have to commit to in order to raise this ambition. We hope to have results within the next 5 years, and we're also trying to get companies to work on specific science-based targets and specific commitments, as Pablo also mentioned, into measuring and being able to report and being able to really show what they're doing in advancing this climate commitment. So this is basically what I had to share with you. A lot of work and a lot of interest from companies, but we also have the challenge to go beyond these 120 companies which are already somewhat committed to climate and to sustainability, and go mainstream to all different companies and to better understand what the business sectors can do in order to really create change and advance the climate strategy within the country.
Thank you, Olga. So maybe we have a look at the questions that are there for, I think, Olga and Pablo. So I will share the screen to see what are the questions that we have received so far. So the first question, can you see my screen here?
Yep.
Yes.
So the first question is for Pablo. How did you estimate the private sector requirement in investments for implementing the NDC's activities in their own context? Maybe Pablo can.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. And one clarification is that we didn't estimate the private sector requirement investments. What we did was identify the different practices that the countries were making. And in this regard, maybe the most near answer for that question would be that certain countries, as Uruguay or as Honduras, with their climate inclusion strategy, are doing is firstly have a dialogue with the private sector in order to visualize what the needs are from the private sector. And the first thing is to operative or make more operative the NDCs regarding the sector and the activity. So one of the main things that the countries are doing is to design NAMAs that are accorded to the specific sector. So in Uruguay, there's a specific NAMA regarding agriculture and also meat production and dairy production. And in Honduras, we have the coffee NAMAs. And through the NAMAs, they establish the specific activities that the private sector has to do. And I will say it again, speaking in private sector language, not speaking in climate change language. And after you have made this translation, then the private sector can specify what the requirements are. And after that, they do the investment plans required for those requirements. So yeah, again, we didn't estimate it specifically, the private sector requirements, but we did identify what these countries are doing to estimate it.
Okay. Then I would switch to the question that is to Olga. Yeah, did you see the question? I by accident I skipped it here.
I saw it, but now it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was something about what recommendations we have for other companies in different countries and to advance these issues. What we found I don't know if this happens in other countries as well, but for us, we've been working with companies on CSR and sustainability for over 24 years. And the most advanced sector starting to deal with sustainability is the most regulated sector. Which is financial institutions, banks, and insurance companies, all kinds of financial sector institutions. This is the ones that have the more regulations are the ones that get more involved with this first. So I think that getting financial institutions to understand their role into creating products and services that cater to all kinds of sectors, small, medium, and larger companies, it's a way to get other sectors and other companies involved in these kinds of actions. So what we've been trying is to work with the financial institutions on a sector roadmap on creating solutions for risk management, for investments, and for credit within the different sectors, understanding what are the risks and what are the main challenges for each of the different sectors. It's not the same for the agricultural sector as it is for industrial sector, as it is for electric utilities or water or tourism. So I think that it's very interesting that once the financial institutions understand their role, they start to roll out products, services, investment opportunities, and financial incentives for companies to start aligning and to really consider this as something that they need to do. We also worked with this in this sense with financial institutions and also with companies that have exporting potential, specifically those companies that export to the European Union, because the standards that they're required to fulfill in order to export their products to other more developed markets like the European Union, Japan, and maybe the US, raise the need and for awareness and for working on social and environmental standards. And this is also very interesting. And this goes all along the value chain to smaller and medium-sized enterprises as well. So once you understand, you need to create not only regulation, but also incentives for smaller and medium-sized companies to align to this, because it's better for the whole sector, because it gives you a more competitive advantage. I think it's a winning combination to roll out climate action to all different sectors and all different companies in order for them to engage. And I think that one of the most successful examples for us is the tourism industry in Costa Rica, which has been always aligned with sustainable tourism. And this goes from the biggest hotel industries in the country to the smallest working capability at, I don't know, maybe a tour operator locally, or somebody that wants to give you part of the sustainable tourism experience in Costa Rica. So this goes all throughout the value chains, and this works pretty well into forwarding sustainability in all kinds of companies.
Okay. I think the next question is also for Olga, and it looks a little bit more into the challenges, no? So what are the main challenges in engaging small and medium companies? I mean, you touched it a little bit, but maybe you can you can elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that the challenges are taking this mainstream, also getting smaller and medium-sized enterprises to look at this not as a cost, but as part of an investment. But for that to happen, you have to have a win-win relationship. They have to really understand what their role is and what their abilities are. And for this, we need to really create financial assistance and financial opportunities for smaller enterprises. We need to really address the challenges for their business sector and really have business solutions and have financial solutions for them in order to advance. So you have to have a really robust financial system, companies that have to develop more sustainable products, for example, smaller agricultural farms, they need to invest on better climate friendly technologies for maybe managing water or for managing other parts of their agricultural business. And we need to have solutions for them. We cannot only expect them to fulfill standards if we don't have the adequate solutions and products and services for them to advance their climate commitments as well.
Okay, thank you. There's one more question for Pablo, which is looking a little bit more into the outcome of the COP. What was the most surprising outcome of the COP about the private sector's point of view with regard to solutions of climate change?
Yes, thank you, Stefan. Well, first, we have concluded that there is not just one private sector, there are a lot of private sectors. And this is one of the main conclusions we have made in the community of practice, and also obviously working with organizations such as AED and other in the region, because once you figure out that the private sector is very heterogeneous and it's different, you have to consider each one of those sectors and each one of those contexts in order to present the value offered to them and for them to be proactive regarding the solutions for climate change. So after realizing that there is not just one homogeneous private sector and that there is a lot of different private sectors, one of the main conclusions is that even though the private sector is heterogeneous, most of the private sector is really proactive and they are really looking forward to contribute to solutions for climate change. The thing is that you as a government have to give all the correct incentives and you have to give the correct you have to give the correct elements in order to the private sector to be just as contributor to the solutions and not just the implementer. As I was saying before, one of the most important elements is to involve the private sector since the designing of the climate policies. And I believe this is something that many countries have figured out. I can speak regarding the Costa Rican case because I obviously work a lot with the DCC and with the organization in Costa Rica. And when the DCC began to involve the private sector in the designing of the climate policies, right now the country is making the updates for the NDCs, and this NDCs updating methodology involves very actively the private sector. And you see that the conclusions and you see that the activities and the solutions that are being proposed by private sector are very innovative, are very different, and are very feasible for the private sector. And therefore, it is really important to involve them from the beginning, from the inception and designing of these climate policies, and not just when you as a government has taken a decision and you just go to the private sector to tell them what the decision is and where do you need the investment and what the regulations will be, because there are decisions that have already been made.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think there's time for the last question before we release also Olma. Is a question to both of you. Did you identify a profile of private companies involved in climate change? Like, I think it's more about what kind of profiles are there also, because Pablo, you were speaking about that that the private, there's not one private sector. So what are those profiles? I don't know. Maybe we start with Olga and then we go back to Pablo.
Okay, yeah. So what we're focusing on is understanding the needs of the different sectors. It can be small, medium, or large companies, but within the same sector, the challenges are going to be pretty similar. Not the solutions, but the challenges are going to be pretty similar. The companies from the agricultural sector, all of them have specific challenges and need to understand what are the main risks and opportunities regarding agricultural or sustainability within agriculture. The ones within the financial sector have different opportunities. The ones in industry and different industrial segments have different risks and opportunities. So what we're trying to understand is what are the most material issues within the different sectors to better understand what the solutions need to be within those sectors and where the opportunities lie. And I think that once you understand that, you can break that down into smaller, medium-sized solutions or large company solutions, but it has to be a sector effort.
Yes, I agree with Olga. I wanted to complement that more than a profile of the companies involved, I believe it depends so much on the leadership of those companies. And this can be really stressed and really emphasized in the list of companies and organizations that Olga mentioned that were signing the commitment that we signed in the pre-COP last year in Costa Rica with the AED and with the DCC. So if you check those companies, they come from all sizes. They come from transnational. They come from national companies. They come from small companies. There are even some non-profit organizations. So it's the private sector in the broadest way we can think about. And when we go to the profile of these companies, I believe that the most common thing they have is the leadership, and that the leaders really believe in climate change and really believe in the role fighting against this problem in climate change and being able to contribute both in decarbonization terms, but also in resiliency and adaptation terms. And therefore, also one of the most important things is identify champions among those companies, because it is really different. And that is one other thing we have figured out, that it is really different for a company when the one speaking about this type of actions is a peer and is another businessman or businesswoman, and when they speak with their peers, it is really different. That if Pablo or if any climate change advisor goes and speak of these terms, because obviously they believe more in their peers than in an expert and a specific technical expert. So once you identify those champions could really take you to the next level. And I believe it is also something that even the UNFCCC has identified, and that's why Gonzalo was the climate champion last year, and that is why right now he is having this companionship with the UK champion, which is another businessman, and that is why those business people are being considered champions, because they can speak to peers and involve even more companies.
Okay, thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Olga. I think we go forward to the other best practices and start with Leonardo Medina Santa Cruz on the supporting the nitric acid climate action group's approach for private sector cooperation. Leonardo, are you with us?
Yes, Stefan. Thank you very much for the introduction.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we can start. I'm guessing you will control my presentation, right? Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the webinar, and thank you all for your attention and interest in private sector cooperation. I'm here to present NACAG, the NACAG initiative, Nitric Acid Climate Action Group, which is a project, a BMU project managed by GIZ, that it's mostly focused on working with the private sector in a very, very particular economic sector, right, which we will discuss more in detail. Next slide, please. I will basically very briefly introduce NACAG and its objectives, give an overview of how do we work with the private sector, which steps do we take in our collaboration with private sector or with companies. And I want to focus mostly on some aspects of our private sector cooperation that have made us develop certain strategies or lessons learned that we have acquired through our cooperation with the private sector. And lastly, some time for questions, although I understand this section will come after the next presentation, right? So we can just wait a little bit until for the questions. Thank you. Just an overall introduction of NACAG. Nitric Acid Climate Action Group is an initiative launched and financed by the BMU with a very, very specific vision. It basically intends to phase out at a global level nitrous oxide emissions from nitric acid production. So why nitrous oxide? Well, as most of you know, I'm sure, nitrous oxide is this greenhouse gas with mitigation, sorry, sorry, I forgot the English thing, greenhouse potential of 265 times that of CO2, right? So each kilogram of N2O means that would be the equivalent of emitting 265 kilograms of CO2 into the atmosphere. And it so happens that N2O is a soft product, non-desired soft product of the nitric acid production process. This makes it very, very attractive or cost-effective as a mitigation measure, right? Because nitric acid production is also very, very centralized all throughout the world. So it's very easy to approach companies that are producing nitric acid and support them in their path to abating or mitigating N2O. We basically do this by offering technical support to both companies, but also governments in terms of technologies or available solutions, abatement solutions to mitigate N2O, and also this mostly with working with governments, policy mechanisms to incentivize long-term abatement of N2O in this sector. We also offer finance in the form of grants, so overall grant agreements to finance the acquiring and the implementation of N2O technologies in the companies, in the production plants themselves, and we pay for the whole installation and startup of the technology. I will go into a little bit more detail on that later, and we'll support governments in integrating the achieved reductions into their NDCs, right? For the compliance with the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. We basically have two big working packages, you could say, or working dimensions. On the one hand, we work with governments on the sector characterization at a national level. So we basically work with them to determine how many plants are operating in the country, what's the production levels of N2O, and what's the mitigation potential of the proposed measure, right? We also work with them on offer technical advice on, I already mentioned this, emission reduction policies to achieve long-term abatement of N2O technologies, so as to ensure that the implemented technology will be used still in the long run, right, in a sustainable manner. And we work also with government representatives on the design and implementation of MRV systems and the integration of the achieved reductions to their NDCs. On the other hand, we work with companies on advising them regarding the available technologies that they have and what's the best abatement solution in relation to their specific operating conditions and their specific needs. And we work with them very, very closely with them to determine a proper abatement strategy. We finance, of course, as mentioned, the all of the abatement technology and all of the technology to monitor emissions, so as to ensure the operation of MRV systems. We cover all the cost of the MRV processes, and we work with the company to ensure that they have the capacity to actually maintain and operate the technology in the long run. All of this, of course, it's not. Well, it is technically for free, but it is conditioned for. Can you next slide, please? It will be. So there is a conditioning. No. Well, actually, yeah. I was looking for the country commitment sign to appear. There is a commitment. We're expected that the governments that will receive the support from NACAG make the commitment and sign the official commitment and make an official agreement with the NACAG Secretariat that they will implement some sort of policy mechanism by 2024 that ensures the abatement of N2O will be sustainable in the long run, right? And on the other hand, that they need to ensure also that the achieved reductions stay in the country so that they are accounted for in the NDCs and that they cannot be commercialized in international markets whatsoever, right? So this is our way of ensuring that this technology that we're implementing and that we're financing, or that the BMU is financing, will actually be used in the long run, and that it will contribute to the Paris Agreement, right? Next slide now, please. Regarding Latin America, there's basically 6 countries that are eligible to participate in NACAG, although we are currently not working in Brazil. So we're basically implementing currently the initiative in Cuba, Mexico, Peru, Colombia, and Argentina. We are expected by 2025. We're expecting that by 2025 we'll have 11 nitric acid plants financed with already operating abatement technology, which represents around 1.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent yearly, right, in its mitigation potential. We, of course, expect that these reductions will be integrated into each country's NDCs and accounted for in their MRV systems. And as another result, we'll have, at least five public policy mechanisms implemented by 2024, which is at least one per country, right? There's possibilities of implementing more than one mechanism in combination, so at least 5 public policy mechanisms. All of these, of course, guided and supported by the NACAG initiative, right? Working alongside both governments and companies. Next slide, please. I wanted to give you just an overview of it. You can also go to the next slide. Just an overview of how do we work with the private sector. How does it look like to implement one of the NACAG mitigation projects, right? So there is this actually quite long phase of NACAG presentation in which we basically work with both governments and the private sector, and we get them together in a series of workshops to discuss the initiative. Discuss the initiative's impacts and potential in the country, and what are the implications for both governments but also companies, right? Nitric acid producers. I will go into a little bit more detail into this phase later. Then once everybody's aware of the initiative, we come into the phase of a technical feasibility studies, where we work alongside companies to determine a proper or the best mitigation strategy from their needs, according to their needs, from both a technical and a financial perspective, right? After this analysis, in which we develop a recommendation regarding abatement technology, we expect companies to send us a grant application, right, which is like the official notice of the companies in which they are asking for the grant and for the support of NACAG. Of course, we have sorry, I just noticed there's a mistake there in the numbers. I apologize. There's a risk management processes in which we implement a due diligence procedure managed by an external firm, completely independent firm, in which NACAG barely gets involved. Just as a way of risk management, but also as a way of capacity building, right? And I will also discuss this in a little bit more detail. We have a grant agreement, so that's basically our contract, in which JSET will says that it will finance the whole technology, and where the company it's actually making the official, now legally binding commitment of using that technology. We have, of course, we decide which type of technology or which provider for the technology through a public tender. in which every provider around the world can participate. We have a section of actually implementing the technology and making all the plant adjustments, which can take up to 2 years actually, depending on plant conditions. And of course, the startup of the abatement processes or the abatement technology, and the integration of that information into national MRB systems. This is a very, very brief overview of how the whole NACAG process looks like working with the companies. But I would like to focus on some of these steps particularly, and discuss some of the strategies that we've taken to make this cooperation with the private sector a little bit more effective, right? Because each one of these steps, it's actually implemented hand in hand with private sector representatives working. We have almost weekly calls, or very, very regular interaction with the companies that we're working with to implement each of these steps. So we've sort of developed some strategies and lessons learned that help us in our cooperation, right, with these companies. Next slide, please. Thank you. Also, yeah, you can go to the next one. So first of all, just the way NACAG's initiative, the NACAG initiative is overall, it's designed, right? It already, just by its design traits, it promotes and makes it easier for us to work with the private sector. On the first hand, it represents a very, very specific NDC measure at a point in time where governments are actually looking for more NDC actions or more mitigation actions that they can integrate into their NDC, because they are expected to increase their ambition in complying with the Paris Agreement, both by this year and also by 2025. So that is exactly why NACAG is timed like it is, right? It considered the NDC cycle, let's say, or the NDC updating cycle into its project timelines. So this makes it very, very attractive for governments, because we're offering a cost-effective NDC, which will be basically implemented for them and financed for them, right? This makes it government want to do this, and put also some pressure into the private sector to do this also, right? So we have most times we have the support for the governments. Not always the case, but most times it happens. Also, we of course offer technical support that companies wouldn't get otherwise, right? So we work alongside companies in making sure that they understand what are all the options on N2O abatement. And again, next slide will be, I believe, with more details in this. Oh no, two more slides will be a little more details. And we of course offer finance, right? So we basically pay for the mitigation measure that we're proposing. All of this, of course, is conditioned to some political commitments, right? So we require this. We ensure that whatever it is that we're offering, which is very attractive, will be properly implemented and properly managed after NACAG is done, basically, after it's gone, right? Yeah, first of all, I wanted to focus here on the stakeholder management. So we basically work first with governments to characterize the sector, basically by building developing a white paper describing all of NACAG's implementation and implications in the country, right, reflecting everything that we know of the country, or the whole knowledge that we develop for the country, including the amount of plants that are working in the government, that are operating there, and the mitigation potential. And we invite, of course, the private sector to work to develop that white paper with us, right, discussing also policy mechanisms. So in this sense, it is very important that we adopt a neutral discourse, basically that we're just offering NACAG, although this is something that is being implemented by governments in coordination with the private sector, right? This is like the official discourse. But of course, every actor knows that without NACAG, no government would have actually tried to regulate the sector, right, if they didn't receive NACAG support. So it's not only that we are neutral, we actually come in the eyes of the private sector, we actually represent regulation. And it's counterproductive to try to hide that fact. It's better to just accept it and actually use it to your advantage, right? Because if you know that the government is looking for NDC measures, you can use that in terms of how do you relate with the private sector in relation to, yes, I represent a policy mechanism, I represent regulation, your government wants to regulate you, but I'm also here to guide you in that process, so as to, at the end of the process, at the exit of the process, the whole sector will be strengthened, right? Next slide, please. So now for the technical support, we work really hand in hand. We actually go to the plants, we visit the plants, we see the conditions that they're working on, we review the documents and all the information that they have available in order to actually develop a very overall recommendation, right? A very holistic, or integrated recommendation regarding what type of mitigation strategy should they should they adopt, right? Of course, this recommendation is non-binding, right? We offer that support, we work with them to develop this support, these recommendations, but we, at the end, it is the companies that will decide what type of technology they want to adopt and what type of technology they want to implement in their own process. As long as it makes financial and technical sense, of course, right? But we will review the decision, but it is their autonomous decision, right? We like to say that NACAG is technology neutral, right? We do not support any type of technology particularly, and this makes companies really appropriate the project and the measure, and because they are expected to manage the whole process of implementation, right? And decision making regarding both the type of solution that they want to implement, but also the provider of that solution and how do they want to work with them, right? We will just supervise the whole process. So this makes us also very attractive to companies in terms that they wouldn't be receiving, or they would have to pay a lot of money to receive this kind of technical support in terms of the feasibility studies, and also, of course, in terms of acquiring this technology. And they get to do this with the financial support and while still maintaining autonomy, right? That is very important. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, Leonardo. You have like 1 minute left.
Yeah, this is actually the last slide. Sorry. And lastly, the due diligence. It's also very important in terms of risk management, because it's not only that we're just giving away all of this technical advice and financing without actually making some sort of review process on like institutional capacities for the company, right? So there is a process in which we invite external consultants to perform a due diligence process to the company, and we also like to frame this process in terms of we will increase your capacities, right? This is not only a risk management process, it is a capability or technical capacity building exercise that we will also offer for the companies. So by framing this due diligence in this way, it is companies are a lot more willing to undertake it, right? And that's it from my side. Yeah, sorry, I went a few minutes above time. I apologize for that, but thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Leonardo. Before we go to the next best practice case, maybe Anne-Catherine, you can put the slide with the Slido again, so that we remind everybody for questions. Please use the Slido tool, and the Q&A session for the two best practice cases we will do after the presentation of Maria Alejandra. So yeah, so I hand over to Maria Alejandra, and maybe we can just show quickly the Slido slide again, so that everybody knows where to insert their questions. Your turn, Maria Alejandra.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. I don't see the slides.
Sorry, it's opening. My Teams is a little bit slow at the moment. I think it's loading. Okay, yeah. And for some reason we're at the beginning, so let me just skip ahead. Okay. here you can just quickly see the link to Slido, slido.com, and add the number 3467 for your questions or scan the QR code with your phone. And now I will advance to Maria Alejandra's presentation. Please excuse the delay.
No, it's
Almost
okay.
There. Okay. There we are.
Thank you. Thank you. Then, well, good morning to everybody, and thank you, well, very much for the invitation and this opportunity to share with you more about the engagement of the tourism sector in the climate change agenda and the experience from the Transforming the Tourism Value Chains project. Next, please. So to give you context, this is a global project funded by ICI that has been implemented since 2017 in Dominican Republic, in St. Lucia, these two representing the Caribbean, and in the Philippines and Mauritius. So its main objective is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and increase resource efficiency in the tourism sector through a value chain and life cycle approach. So as you can see, the project has three main components. The first one on assessment and reporting, also on technical assistance and networking and outreach. So for instance, on the assessment and reporting component, the project has developed an assessment of hotspots associated with the tourism sector to identify the negative environmental impacts in the value chain. To highlight, the outcome of the project is to contribute as well directly with SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production, with SDG 13 on climate change, and also to contribute with their respective NDCs. Next, please. Well, as a result, the project has developed national roadmaps and action plans, including specific targets and indicators for emission mitigation and resource efficiency. So the ones you see here are the ones from Dominican Republic and St. Lucia. And these roadmaps and action plans are looking for the similar goals in terms of beating pollution, in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, for example, reducing food waste, and the reduction of fossil fuels, for example, increasing the use of renewable energy. So in the case of St. Lucia, by 2030, we're aiming to reduce in a 25% the energy consumption, have zero single-use plastics in hotels, and a 50% reduction in the amount of food waste generated, among others. So in our current situation of the pandemic, for example, as you might have seen, the recovery path is the green recovery. Thus, these plans are very aligned with the recovery and are still valid with the SDGs and the climate agreement. Next one, please. So all in all, the project per se has gave us a good participation of the private sector and hotels. Only in Dominican Republic, 30% of hotels have interacted with the project by 2019. More than 50 hotels between Dominican Republic and St. Lucia are committed with the project. We're also developing a series of case studies on the substitution of single-use plastics in hotels and the correct waste management of these items and material. We have developed also a series of communication materials as part of a campaign to raise awareness among hoteliers and tourists to avoid using single-use plastics. We have also trained the countries in resource efficiency, in energy, in plastics and food waste reduction, and in sustainable gastronomy. And indeed, there is a big potential and interest from the countries of the LAC region to replicate this project, for example, Colombia or other countries in the Caribbean. Next slide, please. So I want to share with you very quickly an experience with the private sector, in this case about a procurement of a biomass boiler to operate a grain industrial laundry site in Dominican Republic. So Dominican Republic, normally in Punta Cana, most hotels operate following an all-inclusive model, and this implies large volumes of textiles which are frequently changed, for example, bed linen or towels or curtains. So it was identified that the laundry service had improper treatment of wastewater, and they had an important ecological and environmental impact. So in order to minimize these negative impacts, Grupo Punta Cana decided to rethink its laundry operation to reduce costs by lowering water and energy consumption and giving preference to the use of biodegradable chemicals. But what was the strategy? So Grupo Punta Cana created the first green industrial laundry site, whose main energy source was steam generated by a biomass boiler. And the business model was targeted to provide services not only to Grupo Punta Cana, but to 12 hotels and to the Punta Cana airport as well. And what were the impacts? So the Punta Cana laundry service had substantial cost savings, for example, in annual fuel costs. It also reduced the emissions of the industrial laundry. It also meant a lower use of resources like water, like energy and detergent requirements compared with the traditional laundries that use hotels. Below, you can find the link in which you can look up for more information about this case study and other case studies that we have. Next slide, please. So the project has worked, as you might have seen, very closely with the private sector, with hotels and accommodation businesses. Then the main focus of collaboration has been to map and to visualize the tourism value chains partners and the entire sequence that provide or they receive the value in form of products or in form of services. For example, land use or energy use, transport fuels, outsourced workers, contractors, solid waste, etc. And this to better understand their environmental impacts and influence guests to drive positive change and take action on key environmental hotspots. Next, please. But why is so important the role of the private sector? Well, they have the knowledge, they have the expertise and the information to contribute with the achievement of the main objectives of the project. There is also a tendency among the industry about working towards the sustainable path. Thus, hoteliers are more willing to commit to action and to have tangible and sustainable results. And in this sense, they are also very interested in upscaling the project, as most of the hotels are from recognized hotel chains that operate in multiple countries. Next, please. So what does the project offer to the private sector? Well, assessment, information and analysis on different topics such as energy, water, waste, and greenhouse gas emissions. Also tools to monitor and measure their impacts of the actions taken from the roadmaps and action plans. Also having a better coordination throughout the value chain and a communication platform to share and promote their good practices with the rest of the world. Next slide. Next, please. And what remains of the project to the private sector? So a greater ability to manage greenhouse gas emissions reductions and resource efficiency increase, also a stable collaborations and relationships, and a greater competitiveness and resilience in the value chain. Next, please. So in this sense, we have identified different success factors related to the engagement of the private sector. First of all, since the beginning, the project has been very clear with the partners since all the goals and information were well transmitted to them. We have also focused in the individual needs and interests of hoteliers, which has led us to a high interest of commitment and engagement and their willingness, of course, to cooperate on the project's main goal. We have also promoted the collaboration with other organizations and actors from the value chain, and these have created opportunities to work close with other institutions and build synergies with other initiatives and agendas. Another element is giving instruments to our partners to feel involved, to share knowledge with them. Thus, through capacity building, both to the private sector and public sector as well, we have engaged them. This is particularly important to increase their knowledge and to keep them committed and interested with the project. Also, well, involving them directly in the development of materials, publications, and other communication resources in which they are visible and can showcase their experiences and practices is a very good entry point to have a dynamic and committed participation with partners. Next slide, please. Yeah, so however, we have also had some other learning experiences in which we have identified other edges and opportunities for the project. For instance, we have identified that it's very important to align with the government programs and initiatives from the beginning, as well to look out in the government and the industry if there are monitoring initiatives on sustainable tourism that might complement and reinforce what we have done so far, and also to avoid duplications. Also, it's relevant to identify the top management, in our case of the hotel chains and the industry associations, because this will facilitate indeed the engagement and a quicker access to hotels. Also, recognizing early champions, those who are action-oriented and are influential, will definitely have a very relevant role to achieve the goals of the projects in a more efficient and effective way. And last but not least, influencing the state policy and strategy at the industry accommodation and sector level is also a very important lesson that we have. So I'll stop here, and well, this was a summary of the project from its different perspectives, and also why the private sector is so important in the execution and implementation of the project. Thank you for the time and for your attention.
Thank you, Maria Alejandra. So let's go directly to the Q&A. I will share the screen with you to show you what are questions that have already reached us. Just a second. Here we go. So the first question, I think, is to Leonardo. Could you give us some examples of mitigation actions, abatement technologies implemented under NACAG?
Sure, thank you for that question. It's actually pretty straightforward. So NACAG only works with the nitric acid production sector, right? So in this sense, our mitigation, the mitigation projects that we implement consist on abating N2O in a nitric acid production plant, right? That can be achieved basically through several strategies in terms of where do you install the abatement technology in the process. There's, for example, primary, secondary, tertiary technologies that are categorized that way in relation to where they are installed in the process. I won't go into details in that because it might take a while, but they basically consist on catalysts, right? You install a chemical catalyst that breaks down N2O into nitrogen and oxygen, and it's emitted into the atmosphere just like that. So reducing its warming potential, right? So what we do with companies is just decide where do we want to install these technologies, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The second question that has the second highest rating is for Maria Alejandra. Do you cooperate with the tourist sector within areas of national parks, and which is your experience?
Thank you. Well, in regards to the Transforming Tourism Value Chains project, our scope, it's with the all-inclusive sector. We haven't worked yet with the national parks, but we have a very clear that in the future, this is a very important point because tourism is transforming. You know, it's not only about beach and resorts, but it's also transforming to more mountain tourism, for example. So this is a very important and relevant point that we have noted, because we know that people and tourism is going also to other paths of tourism, and we're very interested, of course, in scaling up our project and focusing in other types of tourism. That's national parks or rural tourism as well, mountain tourism. So this is indeed a very important point to work further in our project in the future, of course.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then we just go to the next question. Which are the main contradictions between the tourist sector and climate change objectives that you have been observing?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say contradictions between the tourism sector and the climate change objectives. I think they really complement to each other. The Transforming Tourism Value Chains project is targeting, as I said, the SDG 13 on climate change, and it is very aligned with our objectives, integrating climate change measures into our national policies, improving awareness raising and human and institutional capacity on climate change. That's why we're focusing on increasing resource efficiency, in mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, in different components now, like water, waste, energy. So I would say that they're a complementary work, and that the SDG 13 is very aligned, or it's included in our tourism project. So yeah, they're very aligned.
Mm-hmm. And then the last question that has reached us is, what are the challenges of the hospitality sector commitment now under COVID regarding those activities they can manage without guests?
Yes, of course, it's been challenging now in general for the tourism sector due to the pandemic and how they are working with us. From our side and from the project, through the roadmaps and the action plans and the focus on sustainability that we have, we definitely believe, and it's a fact, that these plans are aligned with the green recovery, and that they provide the elements to the tourism sector to go to that path and to use these tools to go through it. Also, the ones that the hotels that are maybe not aligned already with the sustainable elements that they need to the recovery, they're now realizing that the sustainability, the green recovery is part of it, and definitely for us is a very good opportunity to showcase all these plans, and also how to involve the sector, that the COVID recovery needs to be aligned with that green and sustainable recovery, and we definitely believe that our program is aligned with it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So there are no more other questions. I think we are good in time to look into or go to the conclusions of our session. Just give me one short moment. So this was our plan today, looking into, after a short introduction, looking into what are best practices and what do we learn from them, and so we went through the importance of engaging to the private sector from the perspective of Costa Rica and the Directorate of Climate Change of the Environmental Ministry. From there, we have looked into how Euroclima, what were the learnings from the Euroclima program when preparing the systematization of good practices in Latin America. Some categories that Pablo mentioned, and I think this document will be relevant to all of us here participating in the webinar. From there, we were looking a little bit more into how the private sector is committed and how the AED in specific, is targeting to promoting the involvement of the private sector in climate actions. And we learned that there is a lot of motivation and interest by the private sector that not only shows the big number of the participation to the alliance of the AED. From there, we looked a little bit into something a little bit more technical as well. The good practices in approaching stakeholders from the NACAG's approach to private sector cooperation. And finished our session with the best practice from the engagement of the tourism sector in climate change, in the climate change agenda, with looking a little bit more into detail into one case of the Dominican Republic. What we have seen in the Q&A and also in the presentation is that that there is not only one private sector, there are many. It's quite a heterogeneous kind of scheme or world, and that we need to involve the private sector not only in implementing what are climate change policies, but already involving them in the design or in the beginning, in the early stages of designing policies and regulations. We need to understand the needs of the sectors. Their challenges quite often are similar, but there are some differences in the risks and opportunities. And although it's important to understand the different kind of profiles of the companies, leadership is one of the key success factors in engaging the climate, the private sector in climate action. And to also encourage this kind of leadership, it is important to identify the champions and to promote the exchange and learning horizontally between different private sector actors, different companies, and to encourage peer exchange. This is the end of our webinar session. Before we come to look into the upcoming webinars, I would like to encourage you to participate in the evaluation to improve the format, to improve how we involve you, to improve also how we deal with the contents, to make it more participatory, to make it more interesting to you. So that's why I will now activate the evaluation on Slido, and I would like to ask you there around 10 questions, short questions, just that you rate those questions so that we understand a little bit more what is of your interest. And while you're doing that, I will give back the microphone to Anne-Catherine to give us an idea on what are we expecting in the next webinars.
Yes, thanks, Stefan. First, before I delve shortly or briefly into the upcoming webinars, I would just like to take the moment to thank our speakers, Maria Alejandra, Leonardo, Olga, Paulo, and Andrea. I think we all agree that the different presentations were very interesting and clearly highlight the importance of including the private sector in all of these climate actions in order to achieve all those climate goals in the different countries. Also to let you know, we will be sharing the PowerPoint of this webinar as well as the recording, if it was successful, fingers crossed, with you shortly. So you can check everything that has been talked about today. If there are any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us on behalf of the ICI Interface project. You can see our email on the bottom of this screen. It's ici.interface.cic@giz.de. Also, if you have any questions to Maria, Leonardo, Olga, Paulo, or Andrea, please also write to us and we can always forward these questions to the 5 of them. So many thanks to our speakers, many thanks to Stefan for moderating today, many thanks to my colleagues from ACCION Clima who have been helping with admitting participants, recording this event, and other tiny little technical details involved in these kind of events. And finally, just to give you a brief overview of what we still have planned for the rest of this year, we have 4 more webinars coming up. The next one will be on September 9th regarding communication and facilitation in virtual spaces. Then we have one at the end of September, the date we still have to confirm, which will be to present the platform Panorama Solutions for a Healthy Planet, which could be an interesting tool for ICI projects to showcase solutions that they have worked on and found within their projects on different topics. We will have a technical workshop in October, at the end of October, that will treat the topic of climate finance. I do want to highlight that this one is exclusive for ICI projects in Central America and the Caribbean, while all of the other 4 webinars will be open also for partners of these projects, local or regional ones, but also for any other organization, initiative, project that is not exclusively ICI. are all free to participate in the webinars. We will close the year with a webinar on green recovery, specifically with a focus on Central America and the Caribbean, and activities and efforts that have been made in the region with regards to this topic. And we will finally conclude this series in February with a webinar on climate governance. So if you would like to participate just as a participant, or even present a relevant best practice example that you have worked on in your projects, please let us know at the email you can see below. We'll gladly include you. We also appreciate if you forward the information to your colleagues, your partners, or other people you think might be interested in participating. As I mentioned, except for the technical workshop, these are all open participation, so please do not hesitate to share the information. We will soon share the updated timeline with all of these dates so that you can schedule accordingly if you want to participate in any of these webinars. And I think that would be it on our behalf. Many thanks again for all of your participation. For those of you who asked questions, we appreciate it very much. And please use the survey that Stefan mentioned to leave your evaluation of this webinar, see what we can improve for the future ones to make this a interesting and useful experience for all of us. Many thanks and have a great day.